Hello, I'm Karen Quattromoni, the Director of Public Relations for Object Management Group, OMG. Welcome to our OMG podcast series. At OMG, we're known for driving industry standards and building tech communities. Today, we're focusing on the Augmented Reality for Enterprise Alliance area, which is an OMG program. The area accelerates AR adoption by creating a comprehensive ecosystem for enterprises, providers, and research institutions. Today, Boeing's Sam Neblett will host the podcast session.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Neblett. I am the co-chair of the Area Research Committee. The area is the Augmented Reality for Enterprise Alliance, and I am also a senior software developer for AR/VR technologies and a technical lead engineer at Boeing. Today, we're going to be talking to Alex Meland on and getting his perspective on one of the trends that the area has identified for 2024 trends to watch in AR for enterprise, and that is the new interaction modalities and how those affect different companies within the AR space for enterprise. So we have today Alex Meland from Contact CI. He has a podcast. Alex, I'll hand it to you for a further introduction.
Thank you, Sam. Good to see you. Thanks for having me. Hey, everybody, Alex Meland. I also go by Alex VR in the space. Like if you find me on Twitter or whatever, it'll be Alex VR. I've been a virtual reality and augmented reality enthusiast, industry professional, and content creator for the past 4 years or so, maybe 5 years, I guess now. I have been working in the haptics space for AR and VR for the past few years. I started with a company called B Haptics. They make wearable consumer haptic devices for gaming. So if you're playing a game, you get to wear this cool vest that makes you look like Batman. And when you get shot from behind, actuators on your back fire. So it's a very immersive haptic experience with what they do. And then from B Haptics, I went over to Contact CI, where I currently work in business development as a strategic partnerships manager. At Contact CI, we make a multi-force ergonomic haptic glove that is designed and created for training, simulation training and exercises, things for the enterprise or the Department of Defense. The Air Force being one of our number one clients. We ship gloves to the Air Force, and they train pilots in virtual cockpits in a way that's scalable and easier to afford than some of the traditional methods. As you mentioned, I also am a podcaster. I have a virtual reality podcast called Between Realities. We do live shows on YouTube, but it exists pretty much on all of the podcast platforms. And while we are gamers, we are taking a philosophical approach to the conversations that we have on Between Realities, and really try to peel away the layers and discuss the nature of this technology, these immersive mediums, virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, AI, how they all kind of intersect. And, we like to do a lot of future tripping and think about where we're going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, because there are a lot of ethical and moral conversations that we need to start having as we start to indulge in these more immersive and intense experiences. And we try to keep that conversation going Between Realities. But otherwise, yeah, I'm just very much ingrained into the VR and AR space. I have affiliation with Upload VR. I've been a writer for VR Trend Magazine. Last year, I was the host of the 7th International VR Awards, which was really cool. We did that in Rotterdam, and got to be up on stage presenting awards to all of the brightest and greatest in the VR and AR space. So I've been very lucky to find myself in a position to kind of have access to all of these cutting edge emerging technologies, get to maybe influence some decisions here or there and report on it, and I basically just had my life changed by this technology and have just had my foot on the gas ever since.
Awesome. You sound like the perfect person to speak on different modalities that our area members and others within the enterprise that utilize AR might want to either adopt or further develop. So one of our first questions. So, what are some of the most promising new trends that you are noticing regarding input methodologies for augmented reality? So, this could be things like voice control, hand gestures, eye tracking, brain computer interfaces. You mentioned AI. So,
Yeah.
what are some new promising trends you're noticing?
So you definitely touched on like the kind of the combination that like I see things heading, primarily with like eye tracking, brain computer interfacing, and maybe potentially some hand gesture stuff too. I think eye tracking is probably the number one. I think that is the lowest hanging fruit in terms of ways to interact with virtual environments. And as we blend that with stuff like AI, we're going to see some like legitimately insane stuff start to appear. But eye tracking, I think, is a big one. Anybody who has used the Apple Vision Pro, I think, is starting to see like a little bit of the direction that I expect a lot of this to go. The Apple Vision Pro is something that is shipped without controllers, and controllers have been for augmented and virtual reality. XR is kind of the term that we use to encapsulate all of these like emerging head-mounted display technologies. And actually, funny enough, the VR awards that I hosted last year is turning into the XR awards for this
Okay.
next upcoming one, because the two are starting to blend. Like you see these new VR headsets that are coming out, like pass through cameras, and the ability to see the world around you and to layer virtual elements into that are like becoming a big thing. You know what I mean? So yeah, I feel like a lot of this is going to kind of converge over the next 5 to 10 years, and we'll start to see devices that are trying to cover all of the bases there. But if you've used an Apple Vision Pro, you can kind of start to see where a lot of this stuff is going, because as controllers have been traditional ways of connecting with virtual environments using these head-mounted displays, they're not exactly the most intuitive. Me being a gamer for my entire life, if you drop two controllers in my hands, like I'm at home. I've got dual thumbsticks, I've got buttons on both sides, triggers on both sides. I know exactly what to do. But there are people who are starting to adopt AR, VR technologies that have never held a controller in their life. And not only that, they don't see how pushing these buttons on my hands translates into new
Right.
skills. Maybe they're using a headset to train on like an oil rig or something like that. So how does that translate? It doesn't help build like more authentic muscle memory stuff. So hand tracking combined with eye tracking is where I see things existing over the next 5 to 10 years. I think people are trying to drop these bulky controllers and like interact with their God-given hands. Our hands are amazing. Like the sense of touch is incredible. And it's something that it's like the only sense that we're born with as babies that we have like fully developed. Like we are interfacing with everything as babies using touch, which is of course why contact CI that is why we do what we do. The idea is to be able to bring that sense of touch with your hands and interact naturally and comfortably in virtual environments in a way that's compelling and kind of bridges that gap for your brain from the virtual experience to like a real one. And of course, the method that we use to accomplish that is haptics, right? Haptic feedback being vibrations or force feedback actuators that are engaging in the perfect moment to kind of trick your brain into having this tangible tactile experience when you reach out and grab a virtual tool or something like that. That really is the missing element right now in terms of using hand tracking to interact with these types of things. If you want to reach out and make a menu selection with hand tracking without any kind of haptic interaction, you're kind of just like poking thin air. It's just like all air. There's nothing happening. But when you reach out and there's like a vibration on the tip of your finger when you hit that button, that signals to your brain, hey, confirmation. Yep, I did the thing. That's what I looked for. And it doesn't necessarily have to mimic like a real one-to-one touch, while of course we would love to see that. Right now, a lot of the ways that things are being done is similar to the ways that haptics are conveyed in your phone or in a virtual, or I mean, in a controller of some kind. If you're playing Call of Duty on your Xbox and you pull the trigger, this thing's like shaking in your hand.
Yeah.
It doesn't exactly feel like a gun firing, but it's enough to connect your brain to the experience to make it a much more like visceral and immersive thing. So hand tracking is huge. Eye tracking is huge. One aspect that eye tracking can like severe or it can improve greatly is performance. There's something that a lot of developers are starting to use called foveated rendering, which basically only renders the image at directly where your gaze is focused.
Right.
And that kind of blends everything else out, and it can really increase the performance of a lot of the applications that are running this stuff. However, with hand tracking, or I mean, with eye tracking, with as compelling as it is, because it is compelling. Like if you've used the Apple Vision Pro, you glance at something, pinch your finger, and boom, you are cruising through menus so much faster than a point and click. Oh, there he is, baby. He's got it. Sam's got the Apple Vision Pro. I love it. But one thing that I think is worth mentioning is that with eye tracking comes a risk of like very potent and like personal data being up for grabs. Your eyes convey an incredible amount of information, more than you realize at a conscious level. And you could be just cruising on a store, on like an app store in a headset. And if it has eye tracking and they're collecting that data, they could potentially figure out things about you that you don't even know based on the way that like your eye flickers when it sees something, like, boom, he likes that, like we can use that data later. So there is some like security issues and stuff like that need to be considered when you're implementing eye tracking technologies. But in my opinion, not only is it worth it, it's also inevitable. So I think it's important that we take it seriously, but at the same time, understand that there are solutions to this, and the juice is worth the squeeze.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's great. So, so eye tracking, hand tracking, haptics, like you mentioned. So these new modalities, you mentioned comparing them to controllers, traditional controllers, like I don't have any in front of me, game controllers essentially, or an Xbox controller. Personally, I have had mixed experiences with hand tracking on different devices. I believe it's getting better. But do you feel that it's better for some applications that have traditional controllers and worse for others? And this doesn't have to just be controllers. It could be something like a touch screen, if you're using an iPad or an iPhone for AR. Is there something where, do you feel that across the board, hand tracking and eye tracking is the way to go for everything? We're talking enterprise use cases, or are there still some use cases for AR where you feel traditional controllers might be the best bet for right now, possibly in 5 years, or is everything going towards hand tracking?
I do not think everything is going towards hand tracking. I do think that there are a lot of use cases where that makes sense. There are some use cases where hand tracking doesn't necessarily need haptics. There are use cases where haptics are incredibly important to the hand tracking experience. And there are a lot of use cases that don't necessarily need hands. The easiest one to kind of identify would be something like a firearms training. This controller that I'm holding in my hand right now is actually a beautiful peripheral. It really is. Like, I love VR controllers. If you've never held one, it really is kind of like holding a traditional gaming controller, like an Xbox controller, and breaking it in half, because you have triggers on both sides. You've got buttons on both sides. It feels really, really good. For something like a firearms training, this is fantastic. Like, these controllers do track better than hands in today's world, in 2024. A lot of the hand tracking solutions right now that are being implemented are optical based, they're camera based, IR sensor based, and they work really, really well for certain applications and not so well for others. We use hand tracking to track our gloves with Contact CI, and we've built the gloves to be ergonomic enough to where they are registered by these IR sensors as hands. They're very form fitted, and they don't have like bulky like exoskeleton stuff hanging off of them and all of that. A lot of the interactions that, because the hand tracking module that we use currently, we're developed to work with all of the optical hand tracking solutions, but my favorite one to use is the Leap controller, the Ultra Leap, Leap Controller 2.
Right.
And the current way that we implement it is by attaching the hand tracking camera to the front of a headset. And then when you stick your hands out, boom, there they are. They're tracking your hands. But there's some limitations to that. For example, like if I have my hands stretched out in front of me and then I decide I want to fix my gaze to something over my left shoulder, the IR camera has now pointed away from my hands and my hands are no longer being tracked. So
Right.
there's like there's certain workarounds, but like ideally, like you would want the single camera that's mounted to your headset to work properly. So for something that like requires my head to be on a swivel, like I'm looking around all over the place, maybe that hand tracking solution isn't ideal. But if I'm doing some kind of like like a pilot training, like I said, for the Air Force, for example, like you're sitting in front of a cockpit, all of your buttons and switches are all right there in front of you. You can easily
Physical.
reach out and grab everything. Like,
So are they in your what you're saying? Are those physical buttons and switches, or they're
they are
all
not.
virtual?
They're all virtual, but
Okay.
they are placed in a way that's ergonomic for the user. Like
Okay.
if you're having to like reach great distances across something, the cameras can't really track your hands as well, so something that's like tight, close, like right here in front of me, not like requiring the user to reach too far or to look in too many different directions. The hand tracking solutions right now work extremely well for that kind of use case. But I wouldn't use hand tracking for something like a firearms training, like I said, because this peripheral, it occupies my hand comfortably. There's a trigger on the back of it, just like there would be on a firearm, and it tracks really, really well, regardless of which direction I'm looking.
Okay.
So, some use cases, like awesome to use peripherals, and it's something like maybe like a I don't know, like a fireman's fire hose or something like that.
Right.
If they had one of those with a tracker attached to it where you can like actually pull the lever, like I think that would work really, really well. Thing is, it's kind of like this like cost versus time versus benefit kind of thing, like having something like a haptic glove, for example, would allow you to do a lot of different stuff that you wouldn't necessarily need like a physical peripheral to achieve, so I think if it's something that translates easily into a controller like a firearm, by all means use the controller. For some use cases, having an additional peripheral would really make sense. Like if it's all you're doing is fire hose training, then maybe get the peripheral and add a tracker to it. But if you want to have a variety of things, then hand tracking, eye tracking, haptics, that's a way to accomplish a lot with like a single stone.
Okay, that makes sense.